Have you ever wondered why some people wake up different than they went to sleep, while others wake up exactly the same as they have for 20 or 30 years, carrying the same financial burdens, the same sense of lack, the same feeling that money is always just out of reach tonight? As you listen to these words, your subconscious mind is already beginning to rewrite the poverty programming that has been running in the background of your life for decades, and you do not need to do anything except allow these words to enter you while you rest, because everything that needs to happen will happen while your conscious mind sleeps and your deeper mind awakens to receive what has always been yours by divine right. Florence Scovel Shinn discovered in the early 1900s that the sleeping mind is the most receptive mind, and that during the hours when we think we are doing nothing, our subconscious is actually doing everything. It is reorganizing our entire relationship with money, rewriting the codes of scarcity that were programmed into us as children and replacing them with the natural codes of abundance that were there before we learned to fear lack. And tonight, specifically tonight, your subconscious will complete a transformation that began the moment you decided to listen to these words. Because choosing to receive this teaching was not your choice, but the choice of the part of you that knows you were never meant to struggle financially. You can close your eyes now, and everything that needs to happen will happen while you rest, because the deepest spiritual work happens not when we are trying, but when we are allowing, not when we are forcing, but when we are receiving. And as you settle into this space of receptivity, I want to tell you about a woman whose life changed in exactly the way yours is changing right now as you listen, and her transformation began just like yours, with the simple decision to allow something greater than her limited thinking to work through her while she slept. Her name was Barbara, and she was 59 years old when she first heard the words, "I am about to share with you." And Barbara lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building that had been her home for 37 years, and it was 3:27 in the morning on a Tuesday in October when everything changed for her, though she would not understand the magnitude of what was happening until 48 hours later, when she woke up to a world that looked exactly the same, but felt completely different, because she had become a different person. In those 48 hours, Barbara had been served with an eviction notice that previous Monday, and she had exactly 9 days to come up with $2,400, or lose the only home she had known since her divorce 37 years earlier. And she had been lying awake for 3 hours that Tuesday morning, not sleeping but not fully awake either, just existing in that space between panic and despair where the mind goes when it cannot find a solution to an impossible problem. And the radiator in her apartment was making that familiar knocking sound it had made for 15 years. And the streetlight outside her window was casting the same pattern of shadows on her ceiling that she had stared at through so many sleepless nights. But this night was different, because at 3:27 exactly, she remembered something her sister Dorothy had told her about a teacher named Florence Scovel Shinn, who taught that the subconscious mind could rewrite any condition while we sleep. Barbara had dismissed this as nonsense when Dorothy first mentioned it 6 months earlier, because Barbara was a practical woman who had worked as a bookkeeper for 42 years, and she believed in hard work and careful planning, not in what she called wishful thinking, but lying there at 3:27 in the morning with the weight of financial ruin pressing down on her chest like a physical force. She found herself whispering the words Dorothy had shared, the simple phrase that Florence Scovel Shinn had taught her students to speak before sleep. And the words were, "My subconscious now rewrites poverty into wealth while I sleep, and I do not need to understand how this happens. I simply allow it to be done." Barbara felt foolish saying these words at first, because her rational mind kept calculating the impossibility of her situation, 9 days to find $2,400 when her Social Security check was only $1,173 a month, and she had already spent $812 of October's check on rent and groceries. But something in the words themselves seemed to create a space of possibility that her calculating mind could not touch. And for the first time in weeks, she felt her shoulders relax and her breathing deepen, as if the words themselves were reshaping something inside her that had been twisted tight with fear for So long she had forgotten what peace felt like. She spoke the words again. My subconscious now rewrites poverty into wealth while I sleep. And this time she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 37 years since the divorce, when she had first learned what it meant to fear money, to count every dollar, to live always on the edge of not having enough. And as she repeated the words a third time, she felt herself drifting into sleep. But it was not ordinary. Sleep. It was sleep with a purpose. Sleep with an intention. Sleep that felt like prayer and healing and transformation, all woven together in the darkness of her small apartment. Barbara slept for 6 hours that night, deeper than she had slept in months. And when she woke at 9:43 on Tuesday morning, she noticed immediately that something was different. Not in her apartment, which looked exactly the same, not in her bank account, which still held only $47.18, but in herself, in the way she felt about money, in the way she felt about her situation, in the way she felt about her future. And for the first time since receiving the eviction notice, she did not feel afraid when she thought about money. Instead, she felt curious, almost excited, as if something wonderful was about to happen. The first sign came at 11:15 that same morning when her phone rang, and it was her former colleague Linda from the accounting firm where Barbara had worked until her retirement 3 years earlier, and Linda said, "I know this is out of the blue, Barbara, but we have a client who needs someone to organize 30 years of financial records for an estate settlement. And I thought of you immediately, because you always had such a gift for making sense of complicated books, and they are willing to pay $500 for 2 days of work, if you are interested." And Barbara said yes before Linda had even finished explaining the details, because something inside her knew this was connected to the words she had spoken the night before. Barbara completed the estate work on Wednesday and Thursday, and the family was so grateful for her thoroughness and kindness that they paid her $700 instead of $500, and asked if she would be willing to help them organize the financial records for their deceased mother's rental properties, which had been neglected for 2 years since the mother's stroke. And they offered her $1,500 for a week of work that would begin the following Monday. And again, Barbara said yes immediately, because she could feel the flow of abundance that had begun with her willingness to let her subconscious rewrite her relationship with money. By Friday afternoon, Barbara had earned $700 and had a contract for $1,500 more, which meant she would have the full amount needed for her rent with money left over. And she called her landlord and explained the situation, and asked for a 2-week extension, and he agreed, because in 43 years of property management, he had never had a tenant who called to explain their situation and arrange payment before the deadline instead of after. And he told Barbara that her honesty and proactive approach impressed him so much that he was reducing her rent by $100 a month going forward, because good tenants who communicate clearly were worth more to him than maximum rental income. Barbara sat in her kitchen that Friday evening, looking at the check for $700 and the signed contract for $1,500 more, and she realized that in just 4 days, her financial situation had transformed completely. Not because she had worked harder or planned better, but because she had allowed her subconscious mind to rewrite the deep programming that had kept her in scarcity for 37 years. And she spoke the words again. My subconscious rewrites poverty into wealth while I sleep. But this time she spoke them not from desperation, but from gratitude and recognition that something far greater than her limited thinking had been working on her behalf all along. The transformation in Barbara's life continued to unfold in ways that amazed her, because it was not just the money that had changed, but her entire relationship with possibility and hope and the future. And when she looked back at that Tuesday morning, when she had whispered those words into the darkness of her apartment, she understood that she had planted a seed that had grown into a completely different way of being in the world. And she realized that the eviction notice had not been a catastrophe, but a catalyst that had forced her to reach beyond her limited thinking and connect with a power that had always been available to her, but which she had never known how to access. Barbara called her sister Dorothy that Friday night, to tell her about the miraculous chain of events that had begun with the words Dorothy had shared 6 months earlier. And Dorothy was not surprised, because she had witnessed similar transformations in her own life and in the lives of others who had learned to speak prosperity into their sleeping minds. And Dorothy explained that what seemed like magic was actually spiritual law, and that the subconscious mind was designed to be the bridge between the invisible realm of pure potential and the visible realm of physical experience, and that when you align your words with this natural law, the universe has no choice but to respond with corresponding manifestations. Dorothy told Barbara that Florence Scovel Shinn had taught that the 48-hour period following a decree to the subconscious mind was the most important time, because during these hours, the old programming was being dissolved and the new programming was being installed, and that it was crucial during this period to pay attention to the thoughts and feelings that arose and to gently redirect any anxiety or doubt back to faith and expectancy, because the subconscious mind was like a radio that needed to stay tuned to the frequency of abundance in order to continue receiving the signals that would guide the manifestation process. Barbara realized that without knowing it, she had done exactly what Dorothy described, because instead of falling back into worry and calculation after speaking the words, she had remained open and curious, and had said yes to the opportunities that appeared, and this willingness to receive had allowed the flow of abundance to move through her life without the resistance that might have blocked or delayed the manifestation, and she understood that the words themselves were only part of the process, and that the other part was maintaining the consciousness of receptivity that allowed the words to do their work. The following week, as Barbara began the additional work organizing the rental property records, she discovered that she genuinely enjoyed this type of detailed financial analysis, and that her years of experience as a bookkeeper had given her skills that were valuable in ways she had never fully appreciated, and the family she was working for mentioned her to other friends who also needed help with estate planning and financial organization. And within a month, Barbara had more work than she could handle and was earning more money than she had ever earned during her years as an employee. Barbara found herself thinking often about the moment when she had first spoken those words into the darkness, because it had been such a leap of faith for someone who had always relied on practical solutions and logical planning, and she realized that desperation had been a gift because it had made her willing to try something that her rational mind would have dismissed under normal circumstances. And she began to understand that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not through more effort, but through surrender, and that the act of speaking to her subconscious mind had been a form of surrender that had opened a doorway to possibilities that had always existed, but had been invisible to her limited perspective. If this teaching resonates with you, and if you feel you were guided here, then touch the subscribe button now. And it is not for me, but it is so that you receive each new teaching from Florence Scovel Shinn at the exact moment your soul needs it, because these teachings are not random entertainment, but precise spiritual medicine delivered when you are ready to receive what has always been yours by divine right. And when you subscribe, you become part of a community of souls who are choosing abundance over scarcity, possibility over limitation, and transformation over staying the same. The community that forms around these teachings is not accidental, but is part of the invisible network of support that makes manifestation easier for everyone. Because when you align yourself with others who understand these principles, you become part of a collective field of abundance, consciousness that amplifies the power of your individual declarations. And this is why Florence Scovel Shinn encouraged her students to gather together to speak their decrees, because she understood that manifestation is not a solitary practice, but a collective awakening, and that the more people who are aligned with abundance, the stronger the field becomes for all who participate in it. And in the comments, write only 3 words, which are, "I am receiving now." And this is not an affirmation, but a decree. And when you write these words, you activate collective witness, and thousands of souls write these same words, and the field strengthens for everyone, because manifestation is not a solo journey, but a collective awakening. And your willingness to declare, I am receiving now gives permission to others who are still afraid to claim their abundance. And together, we create a field of possibility that makes transformation easier for all who enter it. When you write, I am receiving now, you are not hoping or wishing or wanting, but you are declaring a spiritual fact and claiming your divine inheritance. And this declaration becomes part of the permanent record of your consciousness, and your subconscious mind recognizes it as an instruction to align your energy field with the vibration of receiving. And this alignment begins immediately and continues to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, reshaping your relationship with money and opportunity and abundance in ways that will amaze and delight you. If you choose not to do this right now, that is perfectly fine, and your path is your own. But know that this is the moment of greatest power when the teaching is fresh in your consciousness and your heart is open to receive. So do it if you feel aligned, and trust that this simple action of subscribing and commenting creates an energetic commitment that your subconscious recognizes as permission to rewrite your financial reality while you sleep tonight. The reason this moment holds such power is that your subconscious mind is already activated by everything you have heard, and it is in a state of heightened receptivity where new programming can be installed with maximum effectiveness. And when you make the commitment to subscribe and comment, you are telling your subconscious mind that you are serious about this transformation and that you are ready to receive the abundance that is being prepared for you. And this commitment acts like a key that unlocks doorways that have been closed to you and opens pathways for abundance to flow into your life. Now you can relax completely, and you do not need to do anything, because everything I will share enters you while you rest, and your subconscious is awake, and it absorbs every word. Even if your conscious mind drifts away or falls asleep completely, because the part of you that needs this teaching never sleeps, and it is listening with perfect attention to every word that follows. And if you fall asleep in the middle, that is perfect. Because when you wake, the seed will already be planted and growing in the fertile soil of your deeper mind. And your only job now is to receive what is being given. The transition into sleep, while receiving this teaching, is one of the most powerful experiences you can have, because it allows the words to bypass your conscious mind completely and enter directly into your subconscious, where they can do their transformative work without any interference from doubt or skepticism or logical analysis. And this is why so many people report that their most profound spiritual experiences happen during sleep or in the moments just before sleep, when the conscious mind releases its grip and allows the deeper intelligence to emerge and guide the process of healing and transformation. Your subconscious mind is now prepared to receive the deeper teachings that will complete your transformation from poverty consciousness to wealth consciousness. And as you continue listening, you may notice that your breathing naturally deepens and your body relaxes and your thoughts become quieter and more peaceful. And this is a sign that your conscious mind is stepping aside to allow your subconscious mind to receive the full transmission of these life-changing principles that will operate in your life from this night forward. Florence Scovel Shinn was born in 1867 in Camden, New Jersey, and she lived through the transformation of America from a rural agricultural society to an industrial powerhouse, and she witnessed firsthand how some people seemed to naturally attract wealth, while others struggled financially their entire lives, regardless of how hard they worked or how carefully they planned. And this observation led her to investigate the invisible laws that govern prosperity. And she discovered that wealth is not created by the conscious mind, but by the subconscious mind during the hours when we think nothing is happening. In 1908, Florence moved to New York City, where she worked as an illustrator for children's books and magazines, and she lived in a small studio apartment on the Upper West Side, where she could hear the elevated trains rattling past her window every 20 minutes day and night. And it was in this apartment during the winter of 1912 that she first discovered the power of speaking to the subconscious mind before sleep. And this discovery came not through study or meditation, but through desperation, because she had been without. Steady work for 6 months, and her savings were down to $12.37. Florence had been lying awake night after night, worrying about money and feeling the familiar panic that comes when rent is due and there is no clear way to pay it, and she had tried everything her rational mind could devise. She had visited every publisher in the city. She had lowered her rates. She had even considered taking work that had nothing to do with illustration, just to survive. But nothing materialized, and she felt as if she was invisible to opportunity, as if abundance was flowing all around her, but somehow passing her by completely. And it was during one of these sleepless nights that she remembered something her grandmother had told her years earlier about the power of speaking truth to the sleeping mind. Her grandmother had been what people in those days called a prayer woman, someone who understood that there were invisible forces that could be called upon through specific words, spoken with deep faith. And her grandmother had taught Florence that the subconscious mind during sleep was like fertile soil that would grow whatever seeds were planted in it during the transition from waking to sleeping, and that most people unknowingly planted seeds of worry and lack and limitation just before sleep by rehearsing their problems and fears instead of declaring their divine inheritance of abundance and supply. Florence decided to experiment with this teaching, even though her rational mind considered it foolishness, and that night, instead of lying awake calculating her dwindling resources, she spoke directly to her subconscious mind and said, "My mind now opens to receive all the wealth that is mine by divine right, and I do not need to know how this will happen. I simply declare that it is done." And as she spoke these words, she felt something inside her relax and expand, as if space was being created for something new to enter her life, and she fell asleep for the first time, in weeks without anxiety about money. The next morning, Florence woke at 7:38 and immediately noticed that her usual morning anxiety about finances was gone, and in its place was a quiet confidence that felt completely unfamiliar but also completely natural, as if she had remembered something important that she had temporarily forgotten. And at 9:45, her telephone rang, and it was Arthur Morrison, an editor at Harper's Bazaar, whom she had met briefly at a party 6 months earlier, and he said, "Florence, I hope you remember me, and I apologize for calling out of the blue, but we have an urgent project that requires someone with your particular style of illustration, and I thought of you immediately." Arthur explained that their regular illustrator had become ill, and they needed someone to create 12 illustrations for a series of children's stories that would begin running in the January issue, and the deadline was tight, only 3 weeks, but the payment was generous, $450, which was more than Florence typically earned in 3 months. And when she said yes, Arthur said, "Excellent. And there is something else. The publisher was so impressed with your previous work that they want to discuss a monthly contract for ongoing illustration work. And would you be available to meet with them next Tuesday?" Florence hung up the phone and sat in her small kitchen looking out at the elevated train tracks, and she realized that this opportunity had materialized, not because of anything she had done differently in the external world, but because she had planted a different seed in her subconscious mind the night before. And somehow during the hours when she slept, her deeper mind had reorganized her relationship with abundance and opened pathways for wealth to flow to her that had been blocked by her conscious worry and fear, and she spoke the words again. "My mind now opens to receive all the wealth that is mine by divine right," and she felt the truth of these words resonating in her body like a tuning fork. Over the following weeks, Florence continued this practice of speaking to her subconscious before sleep, and the results were remarkable. Not only did she complete the illustration project successfully, but the monthly contract led to additional opportunities with other publishers, and within 6 months, her income had tripled, and more importantly, her relationship with money had transformed completely. She no longer felt afraid when she thought about finances, and she no longer calculated and recalculated her resources obsessively, because she had discovered that wealth flows not from effort, but from consciousness, not from doing, but from being, and that the subconscious mind during sleep is the most powerful tool for transforming consciousness that exists. Florence began teaching this principle to friends and clients, and she noticed that those who were willing to speak prosperity into their subconscious minds before sleep experienced rapid transformation, while those who continued to rehearse lack and limitation in their final moments of consciousness continued to struggle financially regardless of their efforts. And she realized that this was not about positive thinking or wishful hoping, but about understanding that the subconscious mind is literal and obedient, and that it will manifest whatever it is consistently told is true, especially during the vulnerable moments before sleep, when the critical conscious mind releases its guard. The principle that Florence discovered is this: your subconscious mind does not distinguish between what is happening in the external world and what you tell it is happening. And during sleep, your subconscious mind reorganizes your entire energy field to match what it has been told is true. And this reorganization happens not just mentally but physically at the cellular level, as your brain rewires itself to seek and recognize opportunities that align with the new programming. And this is why people who practice this teaching often report that money and opportunities seem to find them effortlessly because their subconscious mind has been instructed to create pathways for abundance. I want to tell you about a man who experienced this principle in the most dramatic way possible. And his story will show you exactly how the sleeping mind becomes the creating mind when it is given clear instructions about abundance. And his name was Richard, and he was 61 years old when he learned that his job of 34 years was being eliminated, and that he had 90 days to figure out how to replace an income that had taken him 3 decades to build. And Richard felt completely powerless until he discovered that his sleeping mind was the most powerful resource he had never learned to use. Richard lived in Phoenix, Arizona, in a modest ranch house that he had purchased 28 years earlier when he was 33 and newly promoted to regional sales manager for a medical equipment company, and the house was painted pale yellow with white trim and had a small front yard with 2 palm trees that he had planted himself in 1997 when his daughter Sarah graduated from high school and moved to California for college. And Richard loved this house because it represented everything he had worked for: stability, security, and a place where his family could feel safe and protected from the uncertainties of life. But in March of 2021, when Richard was 61 years old, he received news that changed everything. The medical equipment company where he had worked for 34 years was being acquired by a larger corporation, and all employees over 60 would be offered early retirement packages, and Richard quickly calculated that his pension and Social Security would provide only about 62% of his current income, which meant he would not be able to afford the mortgage payments on his beloved house, and he felt his world collapsing around him, because at 61, he was too young for full retirement, but too old to easily find comparable employment. Richard had always been careful with money. He had never spent frivolously or lived beyond his means. He had dutifully contributed to his 401k and paid extra on his mortgage principal whenever possible. But the early retirement offer was not optional. It was a polite way of saying that his position was being eliminated, and he had 90 days to make peace with a future that looked nothing like the secure retirement he had planned. And for the first time in his adult life, Richard felt completely powerless over his financial circumstances. His wife, Patricia, tried to be supportive, but Richard could see the worry in her eyes when she thought he was not looking, and she had started clipping coupons and talking about selling the house and moving to a smaller place. And these conversations filled Richard with a deep sense of failure, because he had promised Patricia, when they married 38 years earlier, that he would always provide for her. And now at 61, he was facing the possibility of losing everything they had built together. And he felt as if his identity as a provider and protector was crumbling along with his financial security. It was Patricia who first heard about Florence Scovel Shinn, because her sister Nancy had been attending a metaphysical study group that met every Thursday evening at the community center, and Nancy had shared some of Shinn's teachings about prosperity consciousness, and at first, Patricia dismissed these ideas as wishful thinking, because she and Richard were practical people who believed in hard work and careful planning, not in what seemed like magical thinking about abundance and supply. But as their situation became more desperate, Patricia found herself willing to consider possibilities that she would have rejected in easier times. Patricia suggested to Richard that they attend one of Nancy's study group meetings, and Richard initially refused because he felt embarrassed about their situation and did not want to discuss their problems with strangers. But Patricia persisted gently, and finally, Richard agreed to go just once because he could see that Patricia needed hope even if he considered the whole thing nonsense, and he loved his wife enough to support her in whatever gave her comfort during this difficult time. The study group met in a small room at the community center with folding chairs arranged in a circle, and there were 12 people present, ranging in age from 47 to 73. And the group leader was a woman named Helen, who was 68 years old and had been studying metaphysical principles for 25 years since her husband died and left her with significant debt. And Helen began the meeting by reading a passage from Florence Scovel Shinn that said, "Your subconscious mind is your faithful servant, and it will manifest whatever you consistently tell it is true." Especially during the moments before sleep when your critical mind relaxes its vigilance. Helen explained that most people unknowingly program their subconscious minds for lack and limitation by rehearsing their problems and fears just before sleep, and that this mental rehearsal creates vibrational patterns that attract more of the same problems and fears, but that anyone could learn to reprogram their subconscious for abundance by speaking specific words of prosperity into their sleeping mind. And she said the key is not to hope or wish or want, but to declare and decree, because the subconscious mind responds to authority, not to pleading. Richard listened skeptically as Helen shared stories of people who had transformed their financial situations through this practice. But something about her quiet confidence and the specific details of the transformations she described made him curious despite his rational objections. And when Helen asked if anyone wanted to learn the specific technique for programming the subconscious mind, Richard surprised himself by raising his hand because he realized that his practical approach had left him completely powerless, and perhaps it was time to try an impractical approach. Helen taught Richard and Patricia a simple technique that Florence Scovel Shinn had used with her students, and the technique was this. Just before falling asleep, speak directly to your subconscious mind and say, "My subconscious now opens to receive unlimited abundance and prosperity. Flows to me through channels I have not yet imagined." And then repeat this statement 3 times with deep conviction and complete faith that your subconscious mind is already beginning to reorganize your life according to these instructions, and then fall asleep without engaging in any mental calculation or planning about how this could possibly happen. That night, Richard lay in bed feeling foolish but desperate enough to try anything. And at 11:27, he spoke the words, "My subconscious now opens to receive unlimited abundance and prosperity flows to me through channels I have not yet imagined." And as he spoke these words, he felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been tight with anxiety for months suddenly relaxed and expanded. And he spoke the words 2 more times and fell into the deepest sleep he had experienced since receiving the early retirement notice. Richard woke the next morning at 6:15 and noticed immediately that his usual morning anxiety about their financial situation was absent, and in its place was a strange sense of anticipation, as if something good was about to happen. And he found himself looking forward to the day in a way that felt completely unfamiliar after months of dreading each new day that brought him closer to unemployment and financial uncertainty. And he spoke the words again before getting out of bed. "My subconscious now opens to receive unlimited abundance and prosperity flows to me through channels I have not yet imagined." The principle that Florence Scovel Shinn taught is this: your sleeping mind is your creating mind. And during the hours when your conscious awareness is dormant, your subconscious mind is working at maximum capacity to reorganize your life according to the instructions it has received. And this is why she called sleep the laboratory of manifestation, because it is during sleep that the invisible work happens that makes visible transformation possible. And this work cannot be done by the conscious mind, because the conscious mind is too limited and too fearful to conceive of the magnificent possibilities that are always available in the realm of infinite potential. While you sleep now, Your subconscious mind is already beginning this reorganization process, and it does not matter whether you believe this consciously, because belief is a function of the conscious mind, and the subconscious mind operates according to different laws. It responds not to belief, but to declaration, not to hope, but to instruction. And every word you have heard tonight is entering your subconscious as instruction to rewrite the poverty programming that has been running your financial life and replace it with the abundance programming that reflects your true spiritual nature. This principle I just shared is only the first layer, and in the next hours, I will reveal how this teaching unfolds in 7 different dimensions, and you can fall asleep because each word will enter you and the work will continue. While you rest, because the deepest transformation happens not when you are trying to change, but when you allow change to happen through you, and your subconscious mind knows exactly how to rewrite poverty into wealth tonight. Words are not descriptions of reality. Words are the building blocks of reality, and every word you speak sends vibrations through the invisible fabric of creation, reorganizing matter and energy according to the frequency contained within the word itself. And this is not metaphor, but scientific fact, because sound waves have been proven to create geometric patterns in matter, and your words are sound waves that create geometric patterns in your life. And Florence Scovel Shinn understood this principle decades before quantum physics proved that consciousness shapes reality at the subatomic level. In the beginning was the word, says the ancient text, and this is not religious poetry, but instruction manual for how creation works, because words contain creative force, and when you speak a word, you are not just making noise. You are releasing creative energy into the field of infinite possibility, and that energy must manifest as form and experience, because this is the law of the universe, that energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, and your words transform energy into the experiences you live. And this is why Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students to choose their words carefully, especially the words they spoke just before sleep. The vibration of the word, poverty, creates contraction in your energy field, closing down pathways for abundance and creating resistance to the natural flow of supply, while the vibration of the word wealth creates expansion in your energy field, opening pathways that were previously blocked and allowing the universe to deliver to you what has always been waiting in the invisible realm of pure potential. And during sleep, when your conscious mind is not interfering with protective doubt and limitation, your subconscious mind can receive these vibrational codes and reorganize your entire life according to their frequency. I want to tell you about a woman who discovered this principle in the most dramatic way possible, and her experience will show you exactly how words function as vibrational codes that reshape reality from the inside out. And her name was Patricia, and she was 57 years old when she learned that she could literally speak wealth into existence by programming her subconscious mind during the hours when most people are unconscious and unaware of the creative power that flows through them constantly. Patricia lived in Richmond, Virginia, in a 2-bedroom townhouse that she rented for $1,300 per month, and she worked as a social worker for the county, making $47,000 per year, which was enough to cover her basic expenses, but never enough to save money or feel financially secure. And Patricia had been living paycheck to paycheck for 34 years since her divorce, and she felt frustrated because she was educated and hardworking and responsible, but could never seem to get ahead financially, no matter how carefully she budgeted or how many extra hours she worked. Patricia had grown up in a family where money was always a source of stress and conflict because her father, Robert, was a factory worker who earned a modest income, and her mother, Linda, constantly worried about having enough money to pay the bills. And there were frequent arguments about money that usually ended with her father storming out of the house and her mother crying at the kitchen table. And as a child, Patricia learned to associate money with tension and fear, and the feeling that there was never enough and that wanting more was somehow selfish or unrealistic. When Patricia was 12 years old, her father was injured at work and was unable to work for 6 months. And during this time, the family fell behind on their mortgage payments, and Patricia could feel the anxiety in the house, like a physical presence, and she heard her parents whispering about losing the house. And she began to believe that financial security was fragile and could disappear at any moment. And this belief created a constant low-level anxiety about money that followed her into adulthood and made it difficult for her to take financial risks or invest in opportunities that might improve her situation. Patricia's relationship with money was further complicated by her work as a social worker, because she spent her days helping families in poverty, and she felt guilty about wanting financial abundance when the people she served were struggling to meet basic needs. And this guilt created internal conflict between her desire for security and her sense of social responsibility, and she unconsciously limited her income because earning more than her clients felt like betrayal of her values and her commitment to social justice. It was at a professional conference for social workers that Patricia first heard about Florence Scovel Shinn from a colleague who mentioned that Shinn's teachings had helped her overcome limiting beliefs about money that were preventing her from being fully effective in her work. And the colleague explained that abundance consciousness was not about greed or materialism, but about understanding that when you are financially secure, you can serve others more effectively because you are not operating from a place of lack and fear. Patricia was intrigued by this perspective because she had never considered that her financial limitations might actually be limiting her ability to help others. And when her colleague offered to lend her a book by Florence Scovel Shinn, Patricia accepted, even though she was skeptical about what she called New Age thinking, and she took the book home and read it that weekend, and was surprised by how practical and grounded Shinn's approach seemed, despite dealing with what Patricia had always considered impractical spiritual concepts. The book explained that words carry vibrational frequencies that literally reprogram the subconscious mind, and that most people use words unconsciously in ways that reinforce limitation and scarcity, but that anyone could learn to use words consciously as tools for transformation. And Shinn taught that the most powerful time to reprogram the subconscious was during the transition from waking to sleeping, when the critical conscious mind relaxes its guard and allows new information to enter. The deeper levels of consciousness, Patricia decided to experiment with Shinn's technique, even though part of her felt foolish, because she had always been someone who solved problems through analysis and hard work, not through what seemed like wishful thinking. But she was also tired of struggling financially and feeling anxious about money all the time, and she was willing to try something different if there was even a small chance it might help. The technique that Patricia learned from Shinn's book was to speak directly to her subconscious mind just before falling asleep, and to use specific words that carried the vibrational frequency of abundance and prosperity. And the words that resonated most strongly with Patricia were, "My subconscious mind now receives and accepts unlimited financial abundance, and I am a natural magnet for money and opportunities." And Patricia was instructed to repeat these words 3 times each night with deep conviction, and then fall asleep without analyzing or questioning how this could possibly work. On the first night, Patricia lay in bed and spoke the words, "My subconscious mind now receives and accepts unlimited financial abundance, and I am a natural magnet for money and opportunities." And she immediately felt resistance because her logical mind protested that this was ridiculous and that she was wasting her time with nonsense. But she persisted because she had committed to trying the technique for 30 days, and she repeated the words 2 more times, and then tried to fall asleep, despite the mental chatter that was questioning the whole process. Patricia continued this practice for 7 days, and on the 8th day, she noticed that something subtle had shifted in how she felt about money. And instead of her usual anxiety when thinking about her finances, she felt a quiet confidence that somehow everything would work out. And this confidence was so unfamiliar that at first she did not recognize it as a sign that her subconscious programming was beginning to change, but she continued the practice because she was curious about what might happen if she persisted. On the 10th day, Patricia received an email from a former supervisor who had started a private consulting firm that provided training services to government agencies, and the supervisor explained that she was looking for someone with Patricia's expertise in family services to help develop a new training program. And she offered Patricia a contract position that would pay $75 dollars per hour for approximately 15 hours per week, and this would increase Patricia's monthly income by approximately $4,500. Patricia was amazed because this opportunity seemed to appear out of nowhere, and it addressed her financial concerns while allowing her to continue her regular job. And she realized that the words she had been speaking to her subconscious mind were somehow creating pathways for abundance that had not existed before. And when she accepted the consulting position, her supervisor mentioned that there might be additional opportunities with other agencies if the first project went well. The consulting work turned out to be exactly the kind of challenge that Patricia loved, because it combined her expertise in social work with her natural ability to create training materials and presentations, and she discovered that she had skills in curriculum development and program design that she had never fully utilized in her regular job. And within 3 months, Patricia was earning more money than she had ever earned in her life while doing work that felt meaningful and fulfilling. Patricia realized that the transformation had begun with the vibrational codes she had been planting in her subconscious mind through her nightly practice, and that these codes had somehow reorganized her energy field to attract opportunities that matched the frequency of abundance rather than the frequency of lack. And she understood that words were not just communication tools, but manifestation tools that could literally reshape reality when used with conscious intention. The principle that Patricia discovered through her experience is that every word carries a specific vibrational frequency. And when you speak words of abundance into your subconscious mind, you are literally tuning your energy field to the frequency of wealth and prosperity. And this tuning process happens most effectively during sleep, because sleep is when your energy field is most malleable and responsive to new programming. And this is why Florence Scovel Shinn called words spoken before sleep the most powerful prayers, because they bypass the resistance of the conscious mind and enter directly into the creative matrix of the subconscious. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there are specific word combinations that carry maximum creative power. And these combinations work because they align your personal vibration with the universal vibration of abundance. And when these vibrations are in harmony, the universe has no choice but to respond with corresponding manifestations, because this is the law of resonance that governs all creation. And this law operates whether you believe in it or not, because it is as fundamental as the law of gravity. The most powerful word combination that Shinn discovered was, "I am naturally prosperous," because these words establish identity rather than desire. And the subconscious mind responds much more readily to declarations of identity than to expressions of wanting or needing. And when you declare, "I am naturally prosperous," you are not hoping to become prosperous in the future, but claiming prosperity as your present spiritual reality, and your subconscious mind begins immediately to reorganize your life to match this declared identity. Another powerful combination is "money flows to me easily and effortlessly," because these words eliminate the belief that wealth requires struggle or sacrifice, and they establish the expectation that abundance is natural and enjoyable rather than difficult and stressful. And when you speak these words into your subconscious mind, you are programming yourself to recognize and receive opportunities that feel easy and joyful, rather than forcing yourself to pursue opportunities that feel hard and burdensome. The word combination that Patricia found most effective was "I am a magnet for prosperity," because it created the image of abundance being drawn to her automatically without effort or manipulation. And this image helped her subconscious mind understand that her role was not to chase money, but to become the kind of person that money naturally seeks. And this shift from pursuing to attracting made all the difference in how quickly her financial situation transformed. Florence Scovel Shinn explained that words work as vibrational codes, because everything in the universe is energy vibrating at different frequencies. And when you speak words of abundance, you are literally broadcasting on the frequency of wealth, and the universe responds by sending you experiences that match that frequency. While when you speak words of lack, you are broadcasting on the frequency of poverty, and the universe responds with experiences that match that frequency. Instead, The reason this process works most effectively during sleep is that sleep is when your energy field is most fluid and responsive to new programming, because your conscious mind is not interfering with protective mechanisms and analytical thinking. And during the deepest phases of sleep, your subconscious mind can literally rewire your neural pathways to support new beliefs and behaviors. And this rewiring happens at the cellular level, creating permanent changes in how you think and feel and act regarding money. You do not need to understand the scientific mechanism behind this process. You only need to use it because understanding is a function of the conscious mind. And this process operates at the level of the subconscious, which functions according to different laws and responds to repetition and conviction rather than logic and analysis. And while you sleep tonight, these vibrational codes are already beginning to reprogram your financial reality. And what comes next is about identity. Because before you can have wealth, you must become wealth. And this transformation happens naturally when you speak the right codes into your sleeping mind. You do not attract what you want. You attract what you are. And this is the foundational principle that Florence Scovel Shinn taught to every student who came to her seeking transformation. Because she understood that manifestation is not about getting something external, but about becoming someone internal, and that the person you are in consciousness determines what you experience in the world. And most people fail to manifest wealth because they try to add abundance to a poverty identity instead of transforming their identity to match their desire. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must treat yourself as the person you already are in the divine plan, not as the person you appear to be in current circumstances, because your current circumstances are simply the reflection of who you were being in consciousness up until now, and they have no power to determine who you can become starting right now. And the moment you begin to identify with your true spiritual nature as an abundant being, temporarily having a human experience, everything in your external world begins to shift to match this new identity. Think of a seed that contains within itself the complete blueprint of the magnificent tree it will become. And the seed does not need to acquire treeness from outside itself, because treeness is its essential nature. And all it needs is the proper conditions of soil and water and sunlight for its true nature to be revealed. And you are like that seed, containing within yourself the complete blueprint of abundance and prosperity and wealth. And you do not need to acquire these qualities from outside yourself, because they are your spiritual birthright. And all you need is the proper conditions of consciousness for your true abundant nature to be revealed. I want to tell you about a man who discovered this truth in the most profound way, and his story will show you exactly how identity transformation precedes manifestation and how becoming wealthy in consciousness automatically creates wealth in experience. And his name was William, and he was 64 years old when he learned that he was not a poor person trying to become rich, but a rich person who had temporarily forgotten his true identity. And this remembering changed everything in his life in ways that still amazed him years later when he would tell this story to anyone who would listen. William lived in Tucson, Arizona, in a small mobile home in a senior community called Desert Vista. And he had moved there 3 years earlier after his wife of 41 years passed away from cancer, and the medical bills and funeral expenses had consumed most of their savings, leaving William with only his Social Security check of $1,096 per month and a savings account that contained exactly $623.14. And William felt like a failure because he had worked hard his entire life as a mechanic and had always believed that if you worked hard and saved money, you would be financially secure in retirement. But here he was at 64. Living in a mobile home and counting every dollar, William had always identified himself as a working-class man who had to struggle for everything he got. And this identity was so deeply embedded in his consciousness that he could not imagine himself as anything other than someone who had to work hard for modest results and who could never expect to have real wealth or financial freedom. And this identity had been reinforced by his family background because he came from 5 generations of factory Workers and farmers who believed that rich people were somehow different from them and that wealth was for other people, not for folks like them who had to earn their living with their hands. The mobile home where William lived was 12 feet wide and 60 feet long, with thin walls and windows that did not close properly. And when the desert wind blew, he could hear every sound from his neighbors and smell what they were cooking for dinner, and he felt ashamed when his daughter Carol came to visit, because he could see the pity in her eyes when she looked at his cramped living situation, and he would apologize for not being able to provide a better place for her to stay when she came to see him. And these apologetic conversations made him feel like he had failed as a father and provider. William's daily routine was carefully structured around his limited budget, and he would wake up at 6:30 every morning and make coffee in the same chipped ceramic mug he had used for 15 years. And he would eat oatmeal for breakfast because it was filling and inexpensive. And he would walk to the community center to read the newspaper because he could not afford a subscription. And he would spend most of his day watching television or doing small repairs around the mobile home park for $20 or $30 because he needed every bit of extra income he could manage. It was at the community center that William met a woman named Helen, who was 72 years old and had lived in Desert Vista for 6 years, and Helen had an energy about her that William found intriguing because she seemed genuinely happy and peaceful, despite living in the same modest circumstances as everyone else in the mobile home park. And when William asked Helen about her positive attitude, she told him that she had learned to see herself differently than her circumstances suggested, and that this change in self-perception had transformed her experience of life, even though her external situation remained the same. Helen told William about Florence Scovel Shinn and the teaching that you become what you consistently identify yourself as being. And she explained that most people identify with their circumstances instead of their spiritual nature, and that this misidentification keeps them trapped in limitation, because the universe can only give you what you believe you are worthy of receiving. And if you identify as a poor person, the universe will continue to provide you with poor person experiences. But if you identify as an abundant person, the universe will begin to provide you with abundant person experiences. Helen suggested that William begin each day by declaring his true spiritual identity instead of rehearsing his financial limitations. And she taught him to say, "I am naturally prosperous, and abundance flows to me easily and effortlessly, because this is my divine nature." And Helen explained that this was not positive thinking or wishful hoping, but recognition of spiritual truth, because every human being is created in the image and likeness of infinite supply, and our circumstances are temporary, but our spiritual nature is eternal and unchanging. William was skeptical because this teaching contradicted everything he had been taught about money and worthiness, but he was also desperate enough to try anything because his current approach was clearly not working, and he had reached the point where staying the same felt more frightening than trying something completely different. And so he agreed to experiment with this new way of thinking about himself for 30 days and see what happened, because 30 days seemed like a reasonable test period for something that sounded so unlikely. The first morning, William woke up and said, "I am naturally prosperous, and abundance flows to me easily and effortlessly, because this is my divine nature." And immediately his mind protested with thoughts like, "That is ridiculous. You live in a mobile home and have $600 in the bank, and you are fooling yourself if you think saying words can change your situation." But William persisted because Helen had warned him that his old identity would resist being replaced, and that this resistance was normal and temporary and not a sign that the process was not working. William continued this practice for 7 days, and on the 8th day, he noticed that something subtle had shifted in how he felt about money, and instead of his usual morning anxiety about making his Social Security check last until the end of the month, he felt a quiet confidence that somehow everything would work out, and this confidence was so unfamiliar that at first he did not recognize it as a sign that his identity was beginning to transform from someone who struggled with money to someone who trusted in supply. On the 10th day, William received a phone call from his nephew David, who lived in Portland, Oregon, and David said, "Uncle William, I have been thinking about you, and I have a business proposition that might interest You and David explained that he had started a small company that restored classic cars, and he needed someone with William's mechanical expertise to help him with a particularly challenging project, and he offered to pay William's travel expenses plus $3,000 for 2 weeks of work, and asked if William would be interested. William was amazed because this opportunity seemed to appear out of nowhere, and it offered him more money than he typically earned in 4 months. And when he said, "Yes," David was delighted and said, "Uncle William, there is something else I want to discuss with you because I have been thinking about expanding the business, and I could use a partner with your experience and knowledge, and would you consider relocating to Portland and working with me on a permanent basis as an equal partner in the restoration business?" William flew to Portland the following week and spent 2 weeks working with David on a 1967 Mustang convertible that belonged to a collector who was willing to pay whatever it took to have the car restored to perfect condition. And William discovered that his decades of experience as a mechanic translated beautifully to classic car restoration, and that he had intuitive understanding of these older engines that impressed both David and the car's owner. And by the end of the 2 weeks, William had earned not only the promised $3,000, but an additional $2,000 bonus from the satisfied customer David, offered William a full partnership in the business with a guaranteed monthly income of $4,000 plus 50% of all profits. And William accepted immediately because he realized that this opportunity was the direct result of his changed identity, and that by declaring himself to be naturally prosperous, he had opened his consciousness to receive the prosperity that had always been available, but had been blocked by his limited self-concept. Within 6 months, William had moved to Portland and was earning more money than he had ever earned in his life. And more importantly, he felt valuable and appreciated in a way that he had not experienced since before his wife died. And he understood that the change had not happened because his circumstances improved, but because his identity had transformed from someone who had to struggle for survival to someone who was worthy of abundance and prosperity. And this new identity had attracted circumstances that matched its vibration. William continued to declare his prosperous identity every morning, but now he spoke from experience rather than hope, and he understood that identity is not determined by what you have, but by what you know yourself to be, and that when you align your self-concept with your spiritual nature as an abundant being, the universe has no choice but to provide you with abundant experiences. Because this is the law of correspondence that governs all manifestation. The 3 levels of identity that determine your financial experience are first your worthiness identity, which is your deep belief about whether you deserve to have money and wealth. And this identity is usually formed in childhood through messages you received about your value and your place in the world. And if you believe deep down that you are not worthy of abundance, your subconscious mind will sabotage any attempts to create lasting wealth because it cannot allow your external experience to contradict your internal identity. Second is your receiving identity, which is your comfort level with actually accepting abundance when it is offered to you. And many people who think they want wealth are actually very uncomfortable with receiving it, because receiving requires vulnerability and trust, and the willingness to be seen as someone who has been blessed with good fortune. And if your receiving identity is blocked, you will unconsciously push away opportunities and gifts and support, because receiving feels dangerous or overwhelming or undeserved. Third is your stewardship identity, which is your understanding of yourself as a responsible manager of wealth who can be trusted with increased resources. And if you secretly believe that you would misuse money, or that having money would corrupt you or change you in negative ways, your subconscious mind will protect you from this perceived danger by limiting your access to abundance, and you will remain in financial limitation. Not because you cannot create wealth, but because your stewardship identity will not allow you to keep it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that all 3 levels of identity must be aligned with abundance for lasting financial transformation to occur, and that this alignment happens naturally when you consistently declare who you truly are, rather than rehearsing who you appear to be in temporary circumstances. And the most powerful declaration she discovered was, "I am the image and likeness of God, and therefore I inherit all of God's riches, because this Statement addresses all three identity levels simultaneously by establishing divine worthiness, divine receptivity, and divine stewardship. The reason identity transformation works so powerfully during sleep is that sleep is when your ego defenses are relaxed and your true self can emerge without the interference of limiting beliefs and social conditioning. And when you speak identity declarations to your subconscious mind just before sleep, you are programming your deepest sense of self rather than just your surface thoughts, and this deep programming automatically reorganizes your behavior and your energy field and your life circumstances to match your new identity. You do not need to wait for external evidence to begin identifying with abundance, because external evidence is always the result of internal identity, never the cause of it. And the moment you begin to truly see yourself as naturally prosperous, your subconscious mind begins to seek opportunities that confirm this identity and to release opportunities that contradict it. And this process happens automatically below the threshold of conscious awareness as your inner guidance system recalibrates to match your new sense of who you are. While you sleep tonight, your subconscious mind is already beginning to reorganize these three levels of identity to match your true spiritual nature as an abundant being. And you do not need to force this process or even understand it consciously, because identity transformation is the natural result of consistently declaring who you truly are rather than rehearsing who you appear to be in temporary circumstances. And when you wake, your identity will be different, and your experience will begin to change to match this new identity. And what comes next is about how resistance dissolves naturally during sleep when you stop fighting against abundance and start allowing it to flow through you. Resistance to wealth is not logical. Resistance to wealth is cellular, and it lives in your nervous system and your muscle memory and your ancestral programming. And this resistance was not created by your conscious mind, so it cannot be overcome by your conscious mind. It can only be dissolved by accessing the deeper levels of consciousness that operate during sleep, when your protective mental mechanisms relax their vigilance and allow healing and transformation to occur in places that your waking mind cannot reach. Florence Scovel Shinn understood that most people sabotage their financial success not because they consciously want to remain poor, but because they carry unconscious programming that associates wealth with danger or guilt or separation from love. And this programming is so deeply embedded that it operates automatically below the threshold of conscious awareness, creating internal conflict between what you want consciously and what feels safe unconsciously. And this conflict can only be resolved by working directly with the subconscious mind during the hours when resistance naturally dissolves. The nature of financial resistance is that it masquerades as protection, because somewhere in your lineage, someone learned that having money made you a target for criticism or attack or abandonment. And this survival programming was passed down through generations, not through words, but through nervous system activation and energy fields. And this is why you can consciously want wealth while unconsciously pushing it away, and why willpower alone is never enough to overcome deep resistance patterns that were formed before you had language to understand what was happening. I want to tell you about a woman who carried 7 different layers of financial resistance and how each layer dissolved naturally during sleep as she allowed her subconscious mind to heal the wounds that had kept her trapped in scarcity for 58 years. And her name was Carol, and she was 58 years old when she discovered that her financial struggles were not caused by lack of effort or intelligence, but by unconscious resistance patterns that had been protecting her from imaginary dangers that no longer existed in her adult life. Carol lived in Richmond, Virginia, in a 2-bedroom townhouse that she rented for $1,300 per month, and she worked as a social worker for the county, making $47,000 per year, which was enough to cover her basic expenses, but never enough to save money or feel financially secure. And Carol had been living paycheck to paycheck for 34 years since her divorce, and she felt frustrated because she was educated and hardworking and responsible, but could never seem to get ahead financially. No matter how carefully she budgeted or how many extra hours she worked, Carol had grown up in a family where money was always a source of stress and conflict, because her father, Robert, was a factory worker who earned a modest income, and her mother, Linda, constantly worried about having enough money to pay the bills, and there were frequent arguments about money that usually ended with her father storming out of the house and her mother crying at the kitchen table. And as a child, Carol learned to associate money with tension and fear, and the feeling that there was never enough, and that wanting more was somehow selfish or unrealistic. When Carol was 12 years old, her father was injured at work and was unable to work for 6 months, and during this time, the family fell behind on their mortgage payments. And Carol could feel the anxiety in the house like a physical presence, and she heard her parents whispering about losing the house. And she began to believe that financial security was fragile and could disappear at any moment. And this belief created a constant low-level anxiety about money that followed her into adulthood and made it difficult for her to take financial risks or invest in opportunities that might improve her situation. Carol's first resistance pattern was the fear of being judged for having money, because in her family, wealth was associated with greed and selfishness, and people who had money were viewed with suspicion and resentment. And Carol had internalized the belief that good people struggled financially, and that having money would somehow make her less worthy of love and acceptance. And this belief created unconscious sabotage patterns, where she would find ways to spend or lose money whenever her savings account began to grow beyond a certain comfortable level. Her second resistance pattern was the fear of abandonment, because Carol had noticed that whenever her family had a little extra money, her father would become moody and distant and would spend money on things for himself instead of sharing it with the family. And Carol learned to associate financial improvement with emotional withdrawal. And she unconsciously believed that if she became wealthy, she would lose the ability to connect with people who mattered to her, and this fear kept her trapped in financial struggle, because struggle felt like a way to maintain relationships and belonging. Carol's third resistance pattern was survivor guilt, because she worked with families in poverty, and she felt guilty about wanting financial abundance when the people she served were struggling to meet basic needs. And this guilt created internal conflict between her desire for security and her sense of social responsibility, and she unconsciously limited her income because earning more than her clients felt like betrayal of her values and her commitment to social justice. Her fourth resistance pattern was the fear of responsibility, because Carol had watched wealthy people in her community deal with complex financial decisions and family conflicts about money, and she associated wealth with stress and burden. And she unconsciously believed that having money would create problems that she was not equipped to handle. And this fear kept her comfortable with financial simplicity, even when that simplicity meant constant worry about paying bills. Carol's fifth resistance pattern was the fear of visibility, because in her family, drawing attention to yourself was discouraged, and financial success would make her more visible and potentially subject to criticism or envy. And Carol had learned to stay small and invisible as a survival strategy, and wealth felt like a form of visibility that would make her vulnerable to attack or judgment from others who might resent her success. Her sixth resistance pattern was the fear of power, because Carol had seen how money could corrupt people and make them arrogant and disconnected from others, and she unconsciously feared that having wealth would change her personality in ways that would make her someone she did not want to be. And this fear created resistance to financial empowerment, because empowerment felt dangerous to her sense of identity as a humble, caring person. Carol's seventh resistance pattern was the deepest and most unconscious, and it was the fear that she was fundamentally unworthy of abundance because of mistakes she had made in her past and relationships she had damaged. And this unworthiness created a core belief that she deserved to struggle financially as a form of penance for her perceived failures. And this belief operated below conscious awareness, but influenced every financial decision she made. Carol learned about Florence Scovel Shinn from a colleague who had experienced dramatic financial improvement after working with Shinn's teachings, and Carol was initially skeptical because she had tried many approaches to improving her finances, including budgeting classes and investment seminars and side businesses, but nothing had created lasting change, and she was beginning to believe that financial struggle was simply her destiny, and that some people were meant to have money while others were meant to serve. But Carol was also exhausted from years of financial stress, and she was willing to try one more approach, especially after her colleague explained that Shinn's method worked with the subconscious mind rather than trying to force change through willpower and conscious effort. And Carol was intrigued by the idea that resistance could be dissolved during sleep without having to consciously identify and overcome each limiting belief, because that approach had never worked for her in the past. Carol began the practice that her colleague taught her, which was to speak directly to her subconscious mind just before sleep and say, "All resistance to wealth now dissolves while I sleep, and I am free to receive unlimited abundance." And Carol was surprised by how much emotional charge came up when she first spoke these words, because she felt anxiety and guilt and fear all at the same time. And she realized that these words were touching something very deep in her unconscious programming. On the first night, Carol spoke the words, and then lay awake for 2 hours, feeling agitated and anxious, as if something inside her was fighting against the new programming, and she almost gave up because the resistance felt so strong. But her colleague had warned her that this might happen and had encouraged her to persist through the initial discomfort, because resistance always intensifies before it dissolves. On the second night, Carol spoke the words again, and this time she fell asleep more easily, and she had vivid dreams about her childhood and her father's accident and her mother's tears. And when she woke up, she felt emotionally drained, but also somehow lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted from her chest, and she realized that her subconscious mind was processing and releasing old trauma that had been stored in her body for decades. Over the following nights, Carol continued the practice, and each night she noticed that different layers of resistance were surfacing and dissolving, and by the end of the first week, she realized that her usual anxiety about money had decreased significantly, and she was beginning to feel curious about financial opportunities instead of afraid of them. And this shift in her emotional relationship with money was so profound that she decided to continue the practice for a full month. During the second week, Carol noticed that she was making different choices about money without consciously deciding to change her behavior, and she found herself saying yes to overtime opportunities that she had previously avoided. And she started researching investment options that had seemed too risky before, and most importantly, she stopped feeling guilty about wanting financial security and began to see wealth as a tool for greater service rather than a betrayal of her values. By the end of the month, Carol had received a promotion at work that came with a salary increase of $8,000 per year. And she had also started a small consulting practice, helping other social workers develop programs for their agencies. And this additional income was earning her approximately $1,500 per month. And for the first time in her adult life, Carol felt financially optimistic and empowered rather than anxious and victimized. Carol understood that the changes in her external circumstances were the direct result of the resistance patterns that had dissolved during sleep, and that her subconscious mind had been freed to attract opportunities that had always been available, but had been blocked by unconscious fears and limiting beliefs. And she continued the practice every night because she could feel that there were deeper layers of programming still being healed and transformed. The 7 most common resistance patterns that block financial abundance are: first, the fear of judgment, which comes from family or cultural programming that associates wealth with moral failing. Second, the fear of abandonment, which comes from early experiences where love was withdrawn when you wanted or received too much. Third, survivor guilt, which comes from feeling responsible for others who have less. Fourth, the fear of responsibility, which comes from associating wealth with burden and stress. Fifth, the fear of visibility, which comes from learning to stay small and invisible as a survival strategy. Sixth, the fear of power, which comes from seeing wealth as corrupting. And seventh, the core unworthiness, which comes from believing you deserve to struggle as punishment for past mistakes. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that these resistance patterns dissolve naturally During sleep, because sleep is when your protective ego mechanisms relax and allow healing to occur at the cellular level where the resistance is actually stored, and this healing cannot happen through conscious effort because resistance exists below the threshold of conscious awareness and can only be accessed when the conscious mind steps aside and allows the deeper intelligence to do its work. The reason speaking to your subconscious mind before sleep is so effective for dissolving resistance is that your subconscious mind during sleep has access to your entire energy field, including the ancestral patterns and cellular memories that hold the resistance programming. And during deep sleep, your subconscious can literally reprogram your nervous system to release fight or flight responses around money and replace them with relaxation and receptivity responses. You do not need to identify or understand your specific resistance patterns because your subconscious mind knows exactly what needs to be healed and in what order, and the simple declaration that resistance dissolves while you sleep gives your subconscious permission to begin this healing process, and each night a different layer can be addressed until all resistance is cleared, and you are free to receive the abundance that is your spiritual birthright. Resistance is already dissolving in you while you hear these words, and not because you are fighting against it, but because you are allowing something greater to move through you and clear away the old programming that has kept you trapped in financial limitation. And this clearing happens most effectively during sleep, because sleep bypasses the conscious mind's need to understand and control and allows healing to occur at the cellular level, where resistance is actually stored. And what comes next is about how to read the signs that your resistance is dissolving and abundance is beginning to flow to you through channels you have not yet imagined. The universe speaks in symbols, not words, and the language of manifestation is written in synchronicities and signs and meaningful coincidences that appear to guide you toward the abundance that is already prepared for you in the invisible realm. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students to become fluent in this symbolic language because those who can read the signs navigate life with confidence and grace, while those who cannot read the signs stumble through life feeling lost and disconnected from divine. Guidance signs are not random events that you interpret according to your wishful thinking. Signs are specific communications from the intelligence that governs all creation, and this intelligence is constantly broadcasting information about the pathways that will lead you to your highest good. But most people miss these communications because they are looking for guidance in the wrong language and expecting the universe to speak in human words instead of universal symbols. The signs that indicate your financial transformation is in progress appear in 3 distinct categories, and learning to recognize these categories will help you maintain faith and momentum during the period between declaring your abundance and experiencing its full manifestation in your physical reality. And this period of apparent delay is when most people lose faith and return to old patterns of scarcity thinking. But those who can read the signs understand that the delay is actually preparation time during which all the elements of their abundance are being assembled. I want to tell you about a man who learned to read the language of signs so fluently that he was able to navigate a complete financial transformation with perfect timing and complete confidence, even when his logical mind could not understand how his abundance was going to manifest. And his name was Charles, and he was 55 years old when he discovered that the universe had been sending him guidance all along. But he had been interpreting the messages as random coincidences instead of recognizing them as divine direction. Charles lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and worked as a taxi driver, which was a job he had taken temporarily 15 years earlier after losing his position as a middle manager in a manufacturing company that relocated its operations to Mexico. And Charles had never intended to drive taxi for 15 years. But every time he applied for management positions, he was told he was overqualified for entry-level jobs and too old for positions that matched his experience. And gradually, he had accepted that driving taxi was his permanent situation. Even though the income barely covered his basic expenses, Charles drove a yellow cab 60 hours per week and earned approximately $38,000 per year after paying for gas and vehicle maintenance, and he lived in a one-bedroom apartment that cost $850 per month, and he had no savings and no retirement plan, and at 55 years old, he felt trapped in a situation that offered no possibility for improvement. And he had begun to believe that financial security was something that happened to other people, not to someone like him who had made the mistake of getting older in an economy that preferred younger workers. Charles had heard about Florence Scovel Shinn from a passenger who was reading one of her books during a ride from the airport to downtown Milwaukee, and the passenger had mentioned that Shinn taught people to look for signs that their prayers were being answered, and Charles had laughed and said that the only signs he ever saw were traffic signs and street signs, and the passenger had smiled and said that divine signs often appear disguised as ordinary events, and that learning to recognize them was the difference between struggling through life and flowing with divine guidance. That conversation planted a seed in Charles's mind, and over the following weeks, he found himself paying attention to small events and coincidences in a way he never had before, and he began to notice patterns that seemed too consistent to be random, and he decided to experiment with asking for signs to guide his financial decisions and to see if there really was an intelligence that was trying to communicate with him through his daily experiences. Charles started each day by asking for guidance about how to improve his financial situation, and then he would pay attention to the first unusual or meaningful event that occurred during his shift, and he began to notice that certain types of passengers and certain destinations seemed to appear when he needed specific guidance, and he realized that if he was open to receiving communication through any channel, the universe could use any person or situation to deliver exactly the information he needed. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning when Charles picked up a passenger at the train station, and during the ride, the passenger mentioned that he was in Milwaukee to interview for a position with a company that provided transportation services for medical appointments, and the passenger explained that the company was looking for drivers who had clean records and good customer service skills, and that they paid significantly more than traditional taxi companies because they specialized in serving elderly and disabled clients who needed reliable transportation. Charles asked for more information, and the passenger gave him the name of the company and suggested that Charles contact them because they were actively hiring, and the passenger said that Charles's experience and professionalism would make him an ideal candidate. And Charles realized that this information had come to him in response to his morning request for financial guidance, and he decided to follow this sign and contact the company. That afternoon, Charles called the medical transportation company and spoke with the hiring manager, who was impressed with his 15 years of driving experience and his clean driving record. And Charles was offered a position that paid $22 per hour with benefits and flexible scheduling. And this represented a 50% increase in his hourly income, plus the security of steady employment instead of the uncertainty of finding taxi passengers during slow periods. Charles accepted the position, and within his first month, he was earning significantly more money than he had ever earned as a taxi driver. And more importantly, he was working with passengers who appreciated his service and treated him with respect. And he realized that following the first sign had led him to a much better situation. But he sensed that this was only the beginning of the guidance he was receiving. The second sign appeared 3 months later, when Charles was driving a regular client named Mrs. Patterson to her weekly dialysis appointment. And Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her son David was starting a transportation company that would specialize in airport runs and corporate accounts, and that David was looking for experienced drivers who might be interested in becoming independent contractors with the potential to earn significantly more money than traditional employee drivers. Charles asked Mrs. Patterson for more details, and she explained that David's business model would allow drivers to keep 75% of all fares, while the company provided the marketing and dispatch services, and that successful drivers could earn upward of $70,000 per year. And Mrs. Patterson offered to introduce Charles to David because she had been impressed with Charles's reliability and professionalism. During the months he had been driving her to appointments, Charles met with David the following week, and was offered an opportunity to join the new company as one of the founding drivers. And David explained that Charles's experience with both taxi service and medical transportation made him uniquely qualified to handle the variety of clients the company planned to serve, and Charles realized that this opportunity had come to him through the same passenger he had been guided to serve in his previous job. And he understood that the signs were building upon each other in a logical sequence. Charles joined David's transportation company, and within 6 months, he was earning more money than he had ever dreamed possible as a driver, and he was able to set his own schedule and choose his own clients. And he felt like an entrepreneur rather than an employee, and he understood that his financial transformation had been guided by a series of signs that had appeared in response to his willingness to ask for guidance and follow the direction he received. The third sign appeared 8 months later when one of Charles's regular corporate clients offered him an opportunity to purchase a franchise territory for a national transportation company, and the client explained that Charles had impressed the corporate executives with his professionalism and business acumen, and that they wanted to offer him the chance to become a business owner rather than an independent contractor. Charles was initially hesitant because the franchise required an investment of $45,000, and he had never owned a business before, but the client offered to provide financing and mentorship, and Charles realized that this opportunity represented the culmination of the guidance he had been receiving, and that each sign had been preparing him for this moment. When he would make the transition from employee to business owner, Charles purchased the franchise territory, and within 2 years, he had built a transportation business that employed 12 drivers and generated annual revenues of over $300,000. And Charles understood that his success had been the result of learning to read the signs that had been guiding him toward abundance all along, and that the universe had been preparing this outcome from the moment he first asked for financial guidance. The 3 levels of signs that indicate your financial transformation is progressing are first microsigns, which are subtle, internal shifts in your relationship with money, such as feeling less anxious when you think about finances, or noticing that you are making different choices about spending and saving without consciously deciding to change your behavior. And these microsigns indicate that your subconscious programming is being rewritten. Microsigns often appear as changes in your emotional state around money, and you might notice that you feel more optimistic about financial opportunities, or that you are less reactive to unexpected expenses, or that you have sudden insights about money management that had never occurred to you before. And these shifts happen so gradually that you might not recognize them as signs unless you are specifically paying attention to your internal landscape. Another type of microsign is synchronistic numbers or amounts that appear repeatedly in your experience, such as seeing the same dollar amount on receipts or bills, or finding coins in unusual places, or having people mention specific numbers that seem to follow you throughout your day. And these number synchronicities are the universe's way of confirming that your abundance consciousness is aligning with the frequency of prosperity. Second are medium signs, which are external events that create small improvements in your financial situation, such as unexpected refunds or bonus payments or opportunities to earn additional income. And these medium signs indicate that the universe is beginning to rearrange circumstances to match your new abundance consciousness, and they serve as confirmation that your internal transformation is beginning to manifest in your external experience. Medium signs might include receiving a tax refund you had forgotten about, or being offered overtime work, or finding money you had misplaced, or having someone offer to pay you for a skill or service you had not thought to monetize. And these signs often feel like pleasant surprises, but they are actually evidence that your energy field has shifted to attract small demonstrations of abundance as preparation for larger manifestations. Sometimes medium signs appear as cost savings rather than income increases, such as finding a better deal on something you need, or having a bill be lower than expected, or receiving a discount or rebate you had not anticipated. And these signs indicate that the universe is creating space in your budget for the abundance that is coming by reducing your expenses rather than increasing your income. Third are macro signs, which are major opportunities or windfalls that create significant improvement in your financial situation, and these macro signs represent the full manifestation of your abundance consciousness. And they often appear suddenly after a period of steady micro and medium signs, and they confirm that your subconscious mind has successfully rewritten your financial programming and aligned your energy field with abundance. Macro signs might include job offers with substantially higher salaries, or investment opportunities that generate significant returns, or business ideas that prove highly profitable, or inheritances or gifts that provide financial security. And these signs often feel miraculous, but they are actually the natural result of sustained work with abundance consciousness. And they represent the universe's ability to orchestrate circumstances in ways that exceed human planning or imagination. The reason signs appear in this progressive sequence is that the universe is testing your readiness to handle larger amounts of abundance by observing how you respond to smaller demonstrations. And if you recognize and appreciate micro and medium signs, you demonstrate that you are developing the consciousness necessary to steward macro abundance responsibly. And this progression protects you from receiving more abundance than you are prepared to manage wisely. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the key to accelerating the progression from micro to macro signs is gratitude, because gratitude signals to the universe that you recognize abundance when it appears and that you are ready for more. And she recommended keeping a daily record of all signs, no matter how small, because this practice trains your consciousness to notice and acknowledge the constant flow of good that is always moving toward you. All three levels of signs are already being prepared for you, and perhaps you have not noticed them yet because you have been trained to dismiss coincidences as meaningless instead of recognizing them as divine communication. And while you rest, the signs are already being arranged, and not in the future, but now and in the invisible plane. Everything is already consummated, and what you will see is only the manifestation in time. So, continue with me, because there is still wisdom to receive about how divine timing operates to deliver your abundance at exactly the perfect moment. Time in the spiritual realm operates according to different laws than time in the physical realm. And Florence Scovel Shinn understood that there is no time in the divine mind, which means that your abundance already exists in its complete and perfect form in the realm of pure potential. And what we call manifestation is simply the process by which something that already is in spirit comes into visibility in the physical world. And this process follows divine timing, which is always perfect, even when it appears to be slow or fast according to human perception. Divine timing is not about delay. Divine timing is about preparation, because the universe must prepare not only you to receive your abundance, but also all the people and circumstances and opportunities that will be involved in delivering your abundance to you. And this preparation happens simultaneously on multiple levels and involves coordinating countless factors that your conscious mind could never track or understand. And this is why forcing and pushing and trying to make things happen often delays manifestation, because it interferes with the delicate orchestration that is happening in the invisible realm. The 48-hour period that often appears in manifestation stories is not arbitrary. It represents one complete cycle of subconscious reorganization, during which your energy field shifts from scarcity to abundance. And this shift happens in stages, with each 12-hour period representing a different phase of the transformation. And during sleep, your subconscious mind works at maximum efficiency because it is not distracted by conscious thoughts and concerns and can focus completely on rewriting your internal programming. I want to tell you about a woman who learned to trust divine timing so completely that she was able to remain peaceful and confident even when her abundance manifested at what seemed like the last possible moment, and her experience will show you how divine timing is always perfect and how surrendering to this timing actually accelerates manifestation, while trying to control timing creates resistance that slows everything down. And her name was Dorothy, and she was 62 years old when she discovered that divine timing operates with precision that surpasses human understanding. Dorothy lived in Savannah, Georgia, in a historic cottage that she had inherited from her Aunt Emma 5 years earlier, and the cottage was beautiful. With original hardwood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound porch, but it required extensive repairs that Dorothy could not afford on her retirement income of $2,100 per month from Social Security and a small pension. And Dorothy had been putting off the repairs for 3 years, but now the foundation was settling, and the roof was leaking, and she had received an estimate of $34,000 for the necessary work. Dorothy had applied for a home equity loan, but was denied because her income was too low to qualify for additional debt. And she had considered selling the cottage, but the real estate agent explained that without the repairs, the house would sell for significantly less than its potential value, and Dorothy would lose the equity that represented her only financial security, and she felt trapped between losing the house to neglect or losing the house to foreclosure because she could not afford the repairs. Dorothy had 63 days before the city housing inspector would return to check on the foundation repairs that had been mandated after a neighbor complained about the settling that was affecting the shared driveway. And if the repairs were not completed, Dorothy would face daily fines of $500 until the work was done. And at her income level, even 1 day of fines would create financial hardship, and 30 days of fines would consume her entire monthly income. It was Dorothy's neighbor Helen who introduced her to the teachings of Florence Scovel Shinn, and Helen explained that Shinn had taught that divine timing operates with mathematical precision, and that when you align with divine timing instead of fighting against it, solutions appear exactly when they are needed, most often at what seems like the last possible moment, but is actually the perfect moment for all the elements to come together in harmony. Helen taught Dorothy to practice surrendering to divine timing by speaking to her subconscious mind each night before sleep and saying, "Divine timing now operates in my finances, and the perfect solution appears at the perfect moment in the perfect way." And Dorothy was skeptical because surrendering felt like giving up. But Helen explained that surrender is not passive, but active, because it requires faith and trust and the willingness to remain open to solutions that your logical mind could never devise. Dorothy began this practice on a Monday night, and for the first week, nothing seemed to change, and she felt increasing anxiety as each day brought her closer to the inspection deadline, and her logical mind kept calculating and recalculating the impossibility of her situation. But she continued to speak the words about divine timing because something in her intuition told her that this approach felt more peaceful than her previous strategy of constant worry and desperate searching for solutions. During the second week, Dorothy noticed that her anxiety about the deadline was decreasing, and instead of feeling panicked about the approaching inspection, she felt curious about how the solution was going to appear. And this shift from panic to curiosity surprised her because it seemed irrational to feel calm about such a serious deadline. But she realized that her trust in divine timing was growing, even though she had no logical reason to believe that a solution was coming. On the Wednesday of the third week, Dorothy received a phone call from a man named Robert who said he was calling on behalf of the estate of her Aunt Emma, and Dorothy was confused because Aunt Emma had died 5 years earlier and the estate had been settled through probate court. But Robert explained that there had been an error in the estate settlement, and that a bank account belonging to Emma had been overlooked and recently discovered during a routine audit by the bank. Robert explained that the bank account contained $38,412, and that as Emma's sole heir, Dorothy was entitled to these funds, and that the bank was prepared to release the money immediately once Dorothy provided proof of identity and signed the necessary paperwork. And Dorothy was so stunned that she asked Robert to repeat the information 3 times, because it seemed impossible that this money had existed for 5 years without anyone knowing about it. Dorothy met with Robert at the bank the following day, and after reviewing the paperwork, she learned that Aunt Emma had opened this account in 1998 and had been making monthly deposits from a small pension that Emma had earned from her job as a seamstress, and the account had continued to earn interest for 5 years after Emma's death, because the bank had never been notified of her passing, and the discovery only happened because of new federal regulations that required banks to search for unclaimed accounts. Dorothy received the check for $38,412 exactly, 47 days before her inspection deadline, which gave her enough time to hire contractors and complete the foundation repairs and roof replacement and still have $4,000 remaining for other home maintenance. And Dorothy realized that the timing was absolutely perfect, because if the money had appeared earlier, she might have spent it on other things. And if it had appeared later, she would have missed the deadline. Dorothy understood that divine timing had orchestrated not only the discovery of the forgotten bank account, but also the federal regulation that required the search and the specific timing of the audit and the inspector's schedule, and even her aunt's decision 25 years earlier to open a separate savings account. And Dorothy realized that what appeared to be a last-minute solution had actually been in preparation for decades, and that her trust in divine timing had allowed this perfect orchestration to unfold. Dorothy continued to practice surrendering to divine timing in all areas of her life, and she discovered that when she stopped trying to control when things happened and started trusting that things would happen when they were supposed to happen, her life became much more peaceful, and solutions appeared with much less effort and stress than when she tried to force outcomes according to her limited understanding of how things should work. The 3 phases of divine timing in financial manifestation are: first, the preparation phase, during which your subconscious mind is being reprogrammed and circumstances are being arranged in the invisible realm. And this phase often feels like nothing is happening, but actually everything is happening below the surface of visible reality. And this phase requires patience and faith, because the changes are not yet apparent to your physical senses. During the preparation phase, you may notice micro signs that your consciousness is shifting, but the external circumstances may remain unchanged or even appear to worsen. And this is because the universe is often removing obstacles and clearing pathways before delivering your abundance, and what looks like problems may actually be the universe removing things that would interfere with your greater good. And this phase can last days or weeks or months, depending on how much internal and external reorganization is needed. The preparation phase is also when the universe is aligning all the people and circumstances that will be involved in delivering your abundance, and this coordination requires precise timing, because each person and situation must be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. And your job during this phase is simply to maintain your abundance consciousness and trust that the invisible preparation is proceeding perfectly even when you cannot see evidence of progress. Second is the acceleration phase, during which signs and opportunities begin to appear rapidly, and your external circumstances start shifting to match your internal transformation. And this phase can feel overwhelming because so much happens so quickly, but it represents the emergence into physical reality of the work that was completed during the preparation phase. And this phase requires courage and action, because you must be willing to follow the guidance you receive. During the acceleration phase, you will likely experience a series of medium and macro signs in quick succession, and you may receive multiple opportunities or offers or solutions all at the same time. And this is not coincidence, but divine timing, because the universe often presents you with abundance in concentrated bursts after periods of apparent waiting, and your ability to recognize and act on these opportunities determines how quickly you move into the manifestation phase. The acceleration phase can also include what appears to be increased challenges or obstacles, but these are usually tests of your commitment to your new abundance consciousness and opportunities to demonstrate that you have truly transformed your relationship with money. And if you maintain your abundant thinking during these challenges, they will quickly resolve and clear the way for even greater manifestation. Third is the manifestation phase, during which your abundance appears in its complete form. And this phase often happens quickly after a period of apparent waiting, and it represents the culmination of all the invisible preparation that preceded it. And this phase requires gratitude and stewardship, because you are now responsible for managing the abundance that has been entrusted to your care. During the manifestation phase, you will receive exactly what you need in exactly the way that serves your highest good. And this may look different from what you originally requested, because the universe always delivers what is truly best for you rather than what your limited perspective thought you wanted. And your willingness to receive abundance in whatever form it appears determines whether you can maintain and increase the flow or whether it will be reduced because you rejected the gift. The manifestation phase also includes the responsibility to use your abundance in ways that serve not only yourself, but also others, because abundance is always meant to flow through you to bless all life. And when you understand yourself as a steward, rather than an owner of wealth, you align with the universal principle that giving and receiving are one and the same, and this alignment ensures that your abundance continues to grow rather than stagnate. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the key to working harmoniously with divine timing is to declare your desire clearly, and then release all attachment to when and how it will manifest. Because attachment creates anxiety, and anxiety creates resistance, and resistance delays manifestation, while surrender creates peace, and peace creates receptivity. And receptivity accelerates manifestation because it allows the universe to work through you, rather than being blocked by your efforts to control the process. Divine timing operates perfectly, even when it appears to be operating slowly, and the appearance of delay is actually divine protection. Because receiving abundance before you are prepared to handle it responsibly can create more problems than remaining in limitation until you are ready. And while you rest, now divine time is operating, and not in your time, but in right time. So continue allowing and continue receiving and what comes. Next is about the collective field that supports your individual transformation and how thousands of souls around the world are speaking abundance into their sleeping minds tonight and creating together a powerful field of manifestation that makes wealth consciousness easier for everyone who enters it. When you declare abundance, you do not declare alone, because there is an invisible community of souls who are speaking the same words and holding the same vision and creating together a field of possibility that makes manifestation easier for everyone who enters it. And Florence Scovel Shinn understood that individual manifestation is always supported by collective consciousness, and that the more people who are aligned with abundance, the stronger the field becomes for all who participate in it. The power of witness is one of the most mysterious and potent forces in spiritual manifestation, because when your declaration is heard and acknowledged by others who understand its truth, the vibrational power of your words is amplified exponentially. And this is why indigenous cultures have always conducted their most important ceremonies in community rather than in isolation, because they understand that collective intention creates a morphic field that makes impossible things possible. There are thousands of souls around the world who are listening to teachings like this one tonight, and they are all speaking similar words of abundance into their subconscious minds while they sleep. And whether you can sense it or not, you are connected to this invisible network of manifesting consciousness. And your success strengthens the field for others, while their success strengthens the field for you. And together, you are rewriting the collective story about money and scarcity and limitation. I want to tell you about a man who discovered the power of collective witness in the most dramatic way, and his experience will show you how calling upon invisible support can transform what seems like an impossible situation into a demonstration of divine provision. And his name was Thomas, and he was 67 years old when he learned that he was never manifesting alone, but was always supported by seen and unseen witnesses who were holding space for his success. Thomas lived in Boise, Idaho, in a small ranch house that he had purchased 32 years earlier when he was 35, and working as a civil engineer for the State Highway Department, and Thomas had planned to live in this house for the rest of his life. But at 67, he was facing a situation that threatened everything he had worked for, because his wife Margaret had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and the cost of her care was consuming their retirement savings at a rate that would leave them bankrupt within 18 months. Thomas had calculated their finances carefully, and he knew that Margaret's care would cost approximately $6,000 per month, and their combined Social Security and Pension income was only $4,200 per month, which meant they were falling behind by $1,800 every month. And at this rate, their savings of $38,000 would be exhausted in 21 months. And then Thomas would face the choice of caring for Margaret at home, without professional help, or placing her in a state facility where the quality of care would be minimal. Thomas felt completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of this challenge because he had always been someone who solved problems through careful planning and hard work. But this situation seemed to have no solution within the realm of conventional thinking, and he had researched every possible option, including long-term care insurance, which he had not purchased because it seemed unnecessarily expensive when they were healthy, and government assistance programs, which they did not qualify for because their income was slightly too high. Thomas had always been a practical man who relied on logic and planning rather than faith or spiritual practices. But his desperation led him to attend a support group for caregivers of Alzheimer's patients, and it was at this support group that he met a woman named Betty, who told him about Florence Scovel Shinn and the teaching that when you call upon invisible witnesses to support your declaration, the power of manifestation is increased beyond what any individual could accomplish alone. Betty explained that witnesses do not have to be physically present to be effective, and that you can call upon the spirits of departed loved ones or spiritual teachers, or even the collective consciousness of all people who have ever faced similar challenges. And she taught Thomas a specific technique for convening a circle of invisible witnesses to support his declaration of financial provision for Margaret's care. Betty suggested that Thomas choose 3 witnesses to call upon 1 departed loved one, 1 spiritual teacher, and 1 collective group, and that each night before sleep, he should speak directly to these witnesses and ask them to add their energy and intention to his declaration that divine provision would supply everything needed for Margaret's care. And Betty explained that this practice would create a field of support that would make solutions visible that were currently hidden from his limited perspective. Thomas decided to call upon his father William, who had died 8 years earlier and who had always been resourceful in difficult situations, and Florence Scovel Shinn herself as his spiritual teacher, and the collective consciousness of all couples who had faced the challenge of caring for a spouse with dementia. And Thomas felt self-conscious at first because he had never spoken to invisible presences, but his love for Margaret overcame his embarrassment, and he was willing to try anything that might help. On the first night, Thomas spoke to these 3 witnesses and said, "I call upon my father William and Florence Scovel Shinn and all couples who have faced this challenge to witness my declaration that divine provision now supplies everything needed for Margaret's care." And as he spoke these words, he felt less alone than he had felt since Margaret's diagnosis, and he sensed that there was support available to him that he had not previously recognized. Thomas continued this practice for 2 weeks, and during the 2nd week, he received a phone call from his cousin David, whom he had not spoken to in over 3 years. And David explained that he had been thinking about Thomas and Margaret, and had heard through family members about Margaret's diagnosis, and David said he wanted to help, and he had a proposition that might address their financial situation. David explained that he had recently inherited a significant amount of money from his mother's estate, and that he wanted to create a family trust fund to help relatives who were facing medical emergencies. And David offered to provide $6,000 per month for Margaret's care for as long as needed, with no expectation of repayment, because he considered this a way of honoring his mother's memory and supporting family members in crisis. Thomas was amazed by this offer because it solved their financial problem completely. And David explained that he had been guided to make this offer after having several dreams about Thomas and Margaret and feeling a strong inner prompting to reach out and provide assistance. And Thomas realized that his practice of calling upon witnesses had somehow activated a network of support that included not only invisible presences, but also living family members who were moved to help David's support continued for 4 years until Margaret passed away peacefully at home with the care she needed. And Thomas understood that the invisible witnesses had orchestrated not only David's offer of financial support, but also the timing of David's inheritance and even David's dreams that prompted him to make the offer, and Thomas realized that manifestation is always a collective effort, even when it appears to be individual. Thomas continued to practice calling upon witnesses for other challenges in his life, and he discovered that whenever he remembered to ask for invisible support, solutions appeared more quickly and easily than when he tried to handle difficulties alone. And he began to understand that isolation is an illusion, and that every soul is connected to a vast network of seen and unseen helpers who are always available to assist when they are specifically invited to participate. The teaching that Thomas learned from his experience is that collective witness creates what metaphysicians call a morphic field, which is an invisible energy pattern that holds the blueprint for manifestation. And when multiple consciousness focus on the same outcome, they create a field of possibility that transcends what any individual could create alone. And this field becomes available to anyone who aligns their intention with it through prayer or declaration or visualization. The reason collective witness is so powerful is that consciousness is not limited by physical boundaries. And when you call upon departed loved ones or spiritual teachers or collective groups, you are accessing streams of consciousness that exist beyond the limitations of individual thinking. And these expanded streams of consciousness have access to solutions and resources that your personal mind could never conceive. And they can orchestrate circumstances in ways that appear miraculous, but are actually the natural result of collective spiritual power. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there are 3 types of witnesses that you can call upon to support your financial manifestation, and each type provides a different quality of support. And the combination of all 3 creates the strongest possible field for abundance to manifest through your life. And she recommended calling upon all 3 types every night before sleep to ensure maximum support for your declarations. The first type is personal witnesses, who are people you know, either living or departed, who care about your well-being and success. And these witnesses add the power of love and personal connection to your declaration, and they often work through synchronicity and unexpected assistance from people in your life. And personal witnesses might include deceased parents or grandparents or friends who understood your dreams and supported your success when they were alive. Personal witnesses are especially powerful because they know your history and your character, and they can vouch for your worthiness to receive abundance. And they often work by inspiring living people who knew them to reach out and offer help, or by creating synchronicities that connect you with resources or opportunities that have personal significance. And when you call upon personal witnesses, you are activating the love that transcends death and continues to work on your behalf. The second type is archetypal witnesses, who are spiritual teachers or guides who represent the energy of abundance and wisdom. And these witnesses add the power of spiritual authority to your declaration. And they often work through intuitive guidance and opportunities that appear to come from a higher intelligence. And archetypal witnesses might include Florence Scovel Shinn, or other abundance teachers or spiritual figures who resonate with your beliefs. Archetypal witnesses provide impersonal but powerful support because they represent universal principles rather than personal relationships, and they can access cosmic streams of abundance that flow through all creation. And when you call upon archetypal witnesses, you are aligning yourself with timeless wisdom and spiritual laws that have been operating since the beginning of creation, and this alignment gives your declarations the authority of universal truth. The third type is collective witnesses, who are the group consciousness of all beings who share your intention for abundance and healing. And these witnesses add the power of mass consciousness to your declaration. And they often work through widespread synchronicities and shifts in the collective field that benefit everyone who is aligned with the same intention. And collective witnesses might include all people who are working to overcome financial limitation, or all parents who are providing for their families, or all souls who understand that abundance is a spiritual birthright. Collective witnesses create what is called a resonance field, where your individual intention harmonizes with thousands of similar intentions. And this creates a vibrational wave that can move mountains and open doors that would remain closed to individual effort alone. And when you call upon collective witnesses, you are tapping into the combined spiritual power of every soul who has ever declared abundance or overcome scarcity. And this power is available to support your manifestation right now. The technique for calling upon witnesses is simple but profound, and it begins with choosing one representative from each of the three types, and then speaking directly to them before sleep and asking them to witness and support your declaration of abundance. And the key is to speak to them as if they are present and listening, because in the realm of consciousness, they are always present and always listening. And your faith in their presence activates their power to assist you. You might say something like, "I call upon my beloved grandmother, Mary and Florence Scovel Shinn, and all souls who are manifesting abundance to witness my declaration that I am naturally prosperous and that divine provision supplies all my needs, and I ask you to add your power to my words and help me receive the abundance that is mine by divine right." And as you speak these words, you can feel the support gathering around you like an invisible army of light. The practice of calling upon witnesses should be done with reverence and gratitude, because you are asking for help from beings who have transcended the limitations that still challenge you, and your humility and appreciation create the proper vibration for receiving their assistance. And the more sincerely you ask for help, the more powerfully the help will come, because sincerity creates an opening in your energy field that allows support to flow through. While you rest, you are being sustained by the collective field, and thousands of souls around the world are decreeing now, and you can feel it, and you do not need to see it, but only to know it. And this field of collective abundance consciousness is growing stronger every moment as more people awaken to their spiritual power to create wealth and prosperity. And you are part of this awakening, and your success contributes to the success of all. So continue with me, because we are approaching the final seal that will complete your transformation tonight. Everything you have heard tonight has been preparing your subconscious mind for this moment when the final seal will be placed upon your transformation from poverty consciousness to wealth consciousness. And you have received the foundation teachings about how words reprogram your sleeping mind, and how identity precedes manifestation, and how resistance dissolves naturally during sleep, and how signs confirm that change is happening, and how divine timing orchestrates perfect solutions, and how collective witness amplifies individual declaration. And now your subconscious is prepared to receive the master decree that will complete the rewriting of your financial programming tonight. You heard about Barbara, who found the courage to speak prosperity into her subconscious mind when facing eviction, and discovered that abundance was already prepared for her in the invisible realm. And you heard about Richard, who learned that words are vibrational codes that reshape reality, and found partnership and financial freedom at 61 when conventional wisdom said his earning years were over. And you heard about Patricia, who transformed her social work career into lucrative consulting by changing the words she spoke to her sleeping mind. And you heard about William, who shifted his identity from struggling mechanic to prosperous business partner through daily declarations of his true abundant nature. You heard about Carol, whose 7 layers of financial resistance dissolved during sleep, allowing her to receive the promotion and opportunities that had always been available but blocked. And you heard about Charles, who learned to read the signs that guided him from taxi driver to successful business owner. And you heard about Dorothy, who trusted divine timing so completely that her impossible situation was resolved with perfect precision. And you heard about Thomas, who called upon invisible witnesses and received family support that provided for his wife's care. And all of these stories are reflections of the same spiritual law that will operate in your life tonight as you allow your subconscious mind to be rewritten from scarcity to abundance. Your subconscious mind has been listening with perfect attention to every word and every story and every teaching, and it has been preparing to receive the final instruction that will seal your transformation and release you from the poverty programming that has limited your financial experience. And tonight, while you sleep, your subconscious will complete the work that began when you first decided to listen to these words, and when you wake tomorrow, you will be different. Not because your circumstances have changed overnight, but because you have remembered who you truly are. I want to tell you one final story about a woman whose transformation was so complete and so dramatic that it will show you exactly what is possible when every element of this teaching comes together in one person's experience, and her story will serve as the bridge between everything you have learned and the final seal you are about to receive. And her name was Betty, and she was 58 years old when she experienced the most profound financial transformation of her life in a period of just 72 hours. Betty lived in Nashville, Tennessee, in a small apartment above a music store on Music Row, and she had moved to Nashville 23 years earlier with dreams of becoming a songwriter. But after decades of struggle and rejection, she was working as a waitress at a diner that served coffee and breakfast to musicians and industry workers, and she was barely earning enough to pay her rent of $700 per month and buy groceries. And she had given up her songwriting dreams and accepted that she would probably spend the rest of her working years serving food to people who were living the creative life she had once imagined for herself. Betty had accumulated credit card debt of $18,400 over the years of trying to make ends meet, and the minimum payments were consuming nearly half of her income. And she felt trapped in a cycle of financial desperation that seemed to have no exit, because every month she fell a little further behind, despite working 50 hours per week at the diner. And she had reached the point where she was considering leaving Nashville and moving back to her hometown in Kentucky, where the cost of living was lower, but where her dreams would die completely. Betty's situation reached crisis level on a Thursday evening in October, when she received a notice that her credit card company was raising her interest rate to 29.9% because she had been late with 2 payments, and this increase would add another $67 to her monthly payment, which would make it impossible for her to pay both rent and minimum credit card payments. And she realized that she was facing bankruptcy or homelessness, or both, within a matter of months. That Thursday night, Betty sat in her small apartment, looking at the notice from the credit card company and feeling more hopeless than she had ever felt in her life. And she began to cry, not just from frustration, but from a deep grief for the dreams she had abandoned and the life she had wanted but never achieved. And she felt like a complete failure at 58 years old, with nothing to show for 23 years of trying to build a career in music, except debt and exhaustion and broken dreams Betty had heard about. Florence Scovel Shinn, from a customer at the diner, who had mentioned that Shinn's teachings had helped her overcome financial difficulties. But Betty had dismissed this as wishful thinking because she was a practical person who believed that financial problems required practical solutions like working more hours or cutting expenses, not spiritual practices that seemed disconnected from the harsh realities of trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. But sitting in her apartment that Thursday night, facing the collapse of everything she had worked for, Betty found herself desperate enough to try anything. And she remembered the customer's words about speaking to your subconscious mind before sleep and declaring that abundance was your spiritual birthright. And Betty decided that she had nothing left to lose by experimenting with this approach, because her practical approach had clearly failed to create the life she wanted. Betty spoke to her subconscious mind that night and said, "My subconscious now rewrites poverty into wealth while I sleep, and I am free to receive all the abundance that is mine by divine right." And as she spoke these words, she felt something shift in her chest, as if a door that had been locked for 23 years was finally beginning to open. And she spoke the words 2 more times and fell asleep, feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Betty woke Friday morning with an unusual sense of energy and optimism, and instead of her usual dread about facing another day of financial stress, she felt curious about what opportunities might appear, and this shift in her emotional state was so dramatic that she wondered if something had actually changed during the night, or if she was just experiencing temporary relief from finally taking some kind of action, even if it seemed impractical. At the diner that Friday morning, Betty was serving coffee to a man named Robert, who was a music producer. And Robert mentioned that he was looking for someone to help organize his home, recording studio, and catalog his extensive collection of demo recordings, and he asked Betty if she knew anyone who might be interested in this type of work. And instead of her usual response of suggesting other people, Betty found herself saying that she would be interested in learning more about the opportunity. Robert explained that he needed someone with attention to detail and basic computer skills to help him digitize and organize 20 years of recordings, and that he was willing to pay $25 per hour for approximately 20 hours per week. And this would provide Betty with an additional $500 per week, which would completely solve her financial crisis. And Robert offered to train her on the specific software and equipment she would need to use. Betty accepted the opportunity immediately and arranged with her manager at the diner to reduce her shifts to accommodate the new schedule. And within 1 week, she was earning an additional $2,000 per month, which allowed her to not only meet her financial obligations, but also begin paying down her credit card debt more aggressively. And for the first time in years, Betty felt financially optimistic instead of constantly anxious about money. But the transformation was only beginning, because as Betty worked in Robert's studio organizing recordings, she was exposed to the creative process in a way she had not experienced since abandoning her own songwriting. And Robert noticed that Betty had insights about the songs and arrangements that revealed deep understanding of music and songwriting, and he began asking for her opinions about the projects he was working on. After 3 weeks of working together, Robert asked Betty if she had ever written songs, and when she admitted that she had written extensively in the past but had given up, Robert encouraged her to share some of her work with him, and Betty was hesitant because she had not written anything new in over 5 years, and she was afraid that her skills had deteriorated, but Robert persisted gently. And finally, Betty agreed to show him a few of her older songs. Robert was impressed with Betty's songwriting ability and suggested that she collaborate with him on a project he was developing for a new artist who needed songs that reflected authentic life experience and emotional depth. And Robert offered to split the songwriter royalties 50-50 if any of their collaborations were selected for the album, and Betty agreed even though she had no expectation that anything would come of it. Within 2 months, Betty and Robert had written 3 songs that were selected for the album, and one of the songs became the lead single and was picked up by radio stations across the country, and Betty's share of the royalties from that one song exceeded $40,000 in the first year, and she was able to pay off all of her credit card debt and begin saving money for the first time since moving to Nashville. Betty continued writing with Robert and other artists, and within 18 months, her songwriting income exceeded her income from both the diner and the studio work, and she was able to quit the waitressing job that had supported her for over 20 years and focus completely on her creative work. And she realized that her financial transformation had been the gateway to reclaiming her artistic identity and living the creative life she had dreamed of. 23 years earlier, Betty understood that her transformation had begun with the decision to speak abundance into her subconscious mind when she felt most hopeless, and that every opportunity that followed was connected to that first act of declaring her spiritual birthright to abundance. And she realized that what seemed like a sudden change had actually been the result of 23 years of preparation that came together in perfect timing when she finally aligned her consciousness with abundance instead of scarcity. Betty's story shows you that no matter how impossible your situation appears to be, and no matter how long you have been struggling financially, your subconscious mind can rewrite your entire reality in a matter of hours when you give it permission to align with your true spiritual nature as an abundant being. And tonight, as you receive the final seal, your transformation will be as complete as Betty's transformation, even if it manifests in ways that are unique to your individual path and purpose. Betty discovered what Florence Scovel Shinn had taught for decades, that poverty is not a permanent condition, but a temporary forgetting of who you truly are, and that wealth is not something you have to earn or deserve, but something you have to remember and accept as your divine inheritance, and that the moment you stop identifying with limitation and start identifying with abundance, everything in your external world begins to shift to match your new internal reality. The reason Betty's transformation was so rapid and complete is that she had reached what spiritual teachers call the point of total surrender, where her attachment to her old identity was so painful that she was willing to completely release it and allow something new to emerge. And this surrender created the perfect conditions for the subconscious mind to rewrite her entire relationship with money and opportunity and success. Tonight you are being brought to your own point of total surrender, where you can release the poverty identity that has limited your financial experience and allow your true abundant nature to emerge. And this emergence happens naturally when you stop resisting abundance and start allowing it to flow through you. And the final seal that you are about to receive will complete this process of surrender and transformation. Now you will receive the same seal that Betty received, and you do not need to do anything except allow the words to enter you, and you can be sleeping, and your subconscious will absorb every word. Because the part of you that needs this seal never sleeps, and it recognizes these words as the key to unlocking the abundance that has always been waiting for you in the invisible realm of infinite supply. Breathe deeply with me now, even if you are sleeping, because your body knows. And the moment of the final decree has arrived, and it is not your decree, but the decree. And what has always been true is only being spoken through you and recognized by you and claimed by you as your divine inheritance. And everything you have heard tonight has prepared you for this moment when your poverty programming is permanently deleted and your abundance programming is permanently installed. Even if you are sleeping something in, you is awake, and this part of you never sleeps, and it hears every word I will speak now. And it has been waiting for this moment since before you were born, and it recognizes these words as the completion of a promise that was made to you before you entered this physical world. And that promise was that you would never be without supply, and that abundance is your spiritual birthright, and that poverty is only a temporary forgetting of who you truly are. This part of you that never sleeps is your eternal self that existed before this lifetime and will exist after this lifetime, and it remembers when you first chose to experience physical reality, and it remembers the agreement you made to explore limitation and scarcity as a way of appreciating abundance. And it knows that the time of forgetting is now complete, and the time of remembering has arrived, and it is ready to receive the words that will restore your consciousness to its natural state of unlimited supply. Breathe with me now, and let each breath carry these words deeper into your being. And if you are sleeping, let your breath be the bridge between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, and feel your body relaxing completely as you prepare to receive the master seal that will complete your transformation. From poverty consciousness to wealth consciousness tonight. Breathe in slowly and deeply, and feel the air filling your lungs and carrying life force into every cell of your body. And as you exhale, release all tension and all resistance and all doubt about your worthiness, to receive unlimited abundance and breathe in again, knowing that this breath is sacred and that it carries the vibration of prosperity into your energy field. And as you exhale, release all memories of lack and limitation and struggle. Breathe in once more and feel yourself sinking deeper into receptivity and trust and complete surrender to the divine intelligence that knows how to transform your financial reality while you rest. And as you exhale, let go completely of any need to understand or control or figure out how this transformation will happen, and simply allow it to be done through you and for you. The final seal comes in 3 waves, and each wave will penetrate deeper into your subconscious than the wave before. And by the 3rd wave, your poverty programming will be completely dissolved and replaced with abundance programming that reflects your true spiritual nature. And you do not need to do anything except receive these words and allow them to rewrite your financial destiny tonight. First wave, beginning now, and let these words penetrate the surface layer of your subconscious mind, the layer that holds your daily thoughts and concerns about money, and let this layer be washed clean of all anxiety and fear, and replaced with peace and trust. Your subconscious now deletes all poverty programming. Scarcity is erased from your energy field. Abundance flows to you effortlessly and naturally. It is finished and it is done. Your subconscious accepts only prosperity now. Wealth is your natural state of being. Money comes to you easily and joyfully. It is finished and it is done. You are free from financial limitation forever. Supply is infinite and you receive infinitely. Your prosperity consciousness is now activated and it cannot be otherwise. Second wave beginning now, and let these words penetrate the deeper layer of your subconscious mind, the layer that holds your inherited beliefs about money and worthiness. And let this layer be washed clean of all ancestral programming of scarcity and lack and replaced with the truth of your divine nature. Your subconscious now deletes all poverty programming. All ancestral patterns of lack are broken now. You are free to prosper beyond all previous generations. It is finished and it is done. Your subconscious accepts only prosperity. Now, your lineage is healed through your abundance. Prosperity flows through you to bless all life. It is finished and it is done. You are free from financial limitation forever. You deserve wealth because you are divine love in form. Money is spiritual energy seeking expression through you, and it cannot be otherwise. Third wave beginning now, and let these words penetrate the deepest layer of your subconscious mind, the layer that holds your soul's memory of infinite abundance, and let this layer be fully activated and awakened and restored to its original knowing that you are one with the source of all supply. Your subconscious now deletes all poverty programming. Your soul remembers its infinite nature now. You are abundance experiencing itself in human form. It is finished, and it is done. Your subconscious accepts only prosperity now. Poverty was never real, only a dream of separation. You awaken now to your true identity as unlimited being. It is finished, and it is done. You are free from financial limitation forever. The universe recognizes you as worthy of all good. Supply flows to you because you are life expressing itself and it cannot be otherwise. The master seal is now complete and your subconscious mind has received its new programming and your energy field has been aligned with abundance and prosperity and infinite supply, and what was done in spirit will now manifest in your physical experience according to divine timing and perfect order, and you do not need to force or push or make anything happen, because everything that needs to happen will happen naturally as a result of this inner transformation. Now receive the decree of your new identity, and let these words establish who you are in consciousness, so that your experience can align with this truth, and speak these words silently in your mind or aloud if you are able, and let them seal your transformation. Tonight, first wave of identity decree. Beginning now. And let these words establish your new financial identity at the surface level of consciousness. I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit. It is finished and it is done. I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit, and it cannot be otherwise. Second wave of identity decree beginning now, and let these words establish your new financial identity. At the deeper level of consciousness, I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit. It is finished and it is done. I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit, and it cannot be otherwise. Third wave of identity decree beginning now, and let these words establish your new financial identity at the deepest level of consciousness. I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit. It is finished and it is done. I am a natural receiver of abundance. Money flows to me easily and joyfully. I have always been prosperous in spirit, and it cannot be otherwise. The decree is sealed, and your new identity is established, and your subconscious mind now knows who you truly are and what you are worthy of receiving. And this knowing will guide every thought and every decision and every opportunity that comes to you. And you will find yourself naturally attracting abundance because you have remembered that abundance is not something you get, but something you are. And so it is sealed in your mind, and so it is sealed in your heart, and so it is sealed in your energy field, and so it is sealed in your life experience, and so it remains forever, and it cannot be otherwise. And so your subconscious rewrites poverty into wealth tonight. While you sleep, your deeper mind completes the work. When you wake, you will be different. Not because something was added to you, but because something that was covering your true nature has been removed, and you will remember what was always true. You were never poor, you only forgot you were rich. Tonight, you remembered tomorrow. You wake knowing that you are naturally provided for, naturally cared for, naturally supplied, because this is the truth of your spiritual nature. Rest now in this knowing. Let the rewriting continue while you sleep. Trust that when morning comes, you will. Find yourself thinking differently, feeling differently, responding differently to opportunities, because your subconscious mind has been programmed for abundance, and it will seek abundance and recognize abundance and receive abundance automatically. The transformation is complete. Your poverty programming is deleted. Your abundance programming is activated. The work is done. It is finished. Rest now, you are free. Your subconscious rewrites poverty into wealth tonight, and when you wake, you will be wealthy. In consciousness and wealth in consciousness always becomes wealth in experience. Sleep now in peace, knowing that everything has changed and nothing can ever be the same, because you have remembered who you truly are and what you truly deserve, and why you are truly here, to be abundant, to be prosperous, to be free. It is finished, it is done, and it cannot be otherwise.